start fanboying. Apologies.
I love it. I thank you. I thank you for your enthusiasm.
Yeah. I mean, essentially what we did is we used to talk sports every week, and then everything was shut down with the virus.
Yeah.
And so we went back and we were looking back at our favorite comedy movies of our lifetime, and Wedding Crashers is right at the top of it. So, I mean, who better to talk to than the man that made the film?
I'm happy to talk about it. It was a fun one.
Thank you. I mean, so last week marked the 15th anniversary, I think it was, of the film coming out. Yeah. Can you think back to when it came out? Were you nervous to see how it did? And I mean, would you think that you'd still be talking about it 15 years later?
No, I definitely, I think when something like that happens, there's no way you can have, when something breaks into the zeitgeist like that of culture and people using it and Obama talking about it, it's very strange. I mean, I knew from the test screenings that the movie ran really great in the theater and like shockingly good. It surprised us. And we really didn't know what was going to happen. You know, we opened opposite like Willy Wonka, and there was like really big movies every week, and we just thought we were going to get creamed. And then something happened, and they were, the number was something like 22 is what they thought. And I was like, wow, that would be amazing. And then as the weekend went, Saturday was bigger than Friday. Sunday was bigger than Saturday. It was a total fluke. And by the end of the weekend, we had kind of made history, and then it kept on running for so long. It just, it held in there for a really long time. And it was very surprising. It was fun.
It helps, doesn't it? Because it appeals to just about every audience. Like it applies to like the young lads watching it, and then it applies to the women going for the wedding kind of thing. And you've got every box ticked.
The grandmothers came. That was the shocker. The whole thing that was insane was that. And I remember going to peek in a theater on opening weekend and seeing all these women with their blue hair. And I was like, oh my God, what are they doing here? They're going to be like offended. And it turned out they drove that extra 30% on that opening weekend, and they drove the movie. I mean, almost like the way Titanic kind of just took off, because they just loved the fun, rascally men in suits. There was just something that spoke to that group. And, yeah, it was really fun, and it definitely crossed over into so many different demographics.
Yeah,
kind of, when something happens like that, you don't feel like you're necessarily a part of it. You look at it, and you're just like, the movie just, every weekend I check to see how it's like having a kid in the world. Check on his test grades. How's he doing this week? But it doesn't feel like it's a part of anything that you can ground yourself in at all. So, I mean,
you were the first person to cast Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson together. And was there anything about that you were just convinced that they would be dynamite together, because it obviously exploded?
Funny. Yeah, I'd worked with Vince in my first movie and Owen in my second movie. And I invited Vince to the Shanghai Nights premiere. And he came, and he was like talking to me in the after party. I don't remember what he was doing. Maybe he was giving me notes on the movie or something. Even though it was opening in 3 days. And then he was talking to me, and in the background I saw Owen talking to his mother, and I looked at them, and I had them both like stacked up, and I had an Abbott and Costello went in my head. I loved as a kid. And I'm just like, oh, wow, look, he talks really fast and he talks slow, and he's kind of, it just kind of hit me there. And I went to my agent that night and I said, I'd like to find something with Vince and Owen, and he knew I had been looking to do an R-rated comedy. And literally 8 weeks later, he called me up and he said, I think I just read the right thing. And it was Wedding Crashers. So it was very
crazy. Quick. They've only been cast together once since. We were looking at that, and we've been covering like each film, and each week we say, would Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn together make this movie better? And I think every film we've been like, this would be brilliant.
That's hilarious. It's like, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, they have a specific thing that just really works with them. That's really fun. And these characters were really fun for them. There's something very specific about the characters. They like being, rascals. you know, that are kind of in trouble and doing the wrong thing, but you kind of love them, and it's okay that they're doing the wrong thing. And you know, that's the fun of it, I think.
On that sort of note, with the film, it's kind of, the characters do kind of come of age as it goes on.
Yes.
But with a lot of the films we've done, we often sort of have, some of them are quite gag heavy, and some of them the character kind of goes on a journey. This one kind of incorporates both. Was that a conscious thing to try and make sure there was gags constantly?
Yeah, you know, I love that you asked that. You know, when I started the movie, I remember telling Andrew Panay, one of the producers, that I wanted the movie to have a faster rhythm from the start. I was really frustrated with, you know, I liked Shanghai Nights a lot. The movie did well, but I was very frustrated with the sense of, like, you start your story, you get going, and then you got to build all this energy to get into your set pieces.
Yeah.
And then it declines, and then you got to ramp up again. And there's an exhausting feeling as an audience member. I said, you know, what if we just, it's almost like just changing the tempo from the front. You know, what if the movie's at 6/8, and then by the time the comedy and the set pieces happen, like, you're in this momentum, this rhythm that's very unique to the movie. And then when you have a couple moments that are kind of more human, like Owen and her on the beach, and you slow down, it feels like suspended animation. It's really wonderful because you've been at a clip. It's almost like an X-ray version of what, you know, a movie's supposed to do. But we were very aware of that, actually, and we thought about it, and we talked about it a lot. The pacing was something that I knew I wanted to build around Vince.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think
he drives the rhythm of the movie.
Yeah, even from, like you say, with the opening, he certainly drives it. Almost the monologue, he gives that speech about the Latin guy and his quick clip sentences.
I forgot about that.
I haven't. It's one of my favourite quotes from any film. But as you say, that awesome. Quick clipped as he just ping, 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 ping. It really does set it up for the next 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Sets the tone, doesn't it? That whole scene.
Yeah.
He's a killer. You know, the whole time we were shooting, he's like, "You're making me play it too hot. I have nowhere to go. And I was like, I think people are going to like this. Just keep going. You know. Yeah, something special happened on that movie. It was really, you know, you're very lucky when the chemistry works like that. And you're lucky when you realize you have an actor in a role like the way Vince just kind of owned the psychology of that character. I mean, he's very good at taking things that are kind of crazy and insane and making logic for himself as an actor. So he's performing it from a real place. Yeah. You know, he's really upset with John, like, for real, about ridiculous shit, you know, the Mahjong game, you know. But that's Vince, and it was part of what was really special. That happened.
With someone like Vince, do you have to give them a lot of freedom to sort of play with the character and improvise? And you've kind of got them to, because we've spoken to a couple of actors and we got their perspective on it, but we haven't spoken to a director. So, kind of thing, does that make you nervous, or do you just say you've got to let him?
No. Look, I don't leave anything for happenstance on set. You know, we actually spent 3 weeks rehearsing before we shot that movie. Yeah. And during those rehearsals, I do improvisations based on the scenes. We run the scenes without the dialogue.
Okay.
Just so I can see the bones of the theater of it, you know. And they would have things that came out all the time, ad-libs and stuff that would happen. And then I would have a computer and I'd re-script them into the scenes. But when you see them performing on camera, they are performing a scripted version of an improvisation. But so I say that because I think it's an incredibly high skill level to make it look like something that natural is happening.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I mean, it feels completely spontaneous, and it's actually written dialogue that they helped craft inside the script. You know, the script has some dialogue, they bring some stuff to it, and it gets built that way, and then they perform it that way, you know. And it's really it's pretty crazy how they would build a rhythm together, you know. And I wouldn't cut the camera. I would just start it again and start it again and start it again. It would just get hotter and hotter and hotter. It was really fun.
Some of the scenes, like the shout scene with the wedding montage that goes through, and you've got the football scene where there's so much going into it. what were they like to film? Because there's so much going on in so many different places.
It was crazy. The dinner table scene is crazy. There's more eye lines and points of view and things going on. I mean, it is, my editor really made those scenes work. I shot tons of coverage because I just couldn't tell I knew where I wanted to be on specific moments, but it's hard to understand where you're going to be at any point in a dinner table scene with 12 people at a table, and they're all doing something funny. Their reaction shots are all great. Walken would be like rolling his eyes and doing stuff, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to use half of that stuff. I can't do the scene through Walken. One of the funny scenes was, a good example is, when he does the motorboat thing, when he goes up, that was something that I remember Vince was like, for some reason he was like, I don't like the scene, or people just want to go to Owen and Rachel. That's the A story. Like, we don't need the scene. And I was like, please, let's just try it. It's really funny. And he's like, well, then I got to, I just came in my pants and need a wet stain on my pants. And I'm like, okay, put a wet stain on. Super logical. You think we were doing Arthur Miller or Shakespeare, and he's like very serious. He's like, I can't make that turn. I'm so angry with him. Like, why would I all of a sudden be so fascinated with what he did with her? And I'm like, I don't know, let's play with it and find it. He comes up the steps. He's convinced that the scene's not going to work. And he just nails it on the very first take. And then he turns around and goes, oh, wait, I have another idea. And another idea. And another idea. And by the time you're done shooting 7, 8 takes, I'm like, I can't even use, the first take was great. But I do think part of the madness with Vince is that he makes a turn. That turn is ridiculous. It doesn't really make sense. He made it make sense to himself. He found the crazy place where he's so angry, but he's very, very interested in what happened with Jane Seymour. And so he's just, he commits to the absurdity. And what he gets out of that is just something very unique to his color as an actor and as a comedian, But Owen used to laugh at us because we'd be in the corner talking about, what was the beat before you came in the door? What was the scene before? Like, as if we're doing, and he'd be like, you guys still making The Godfather over there? Really movie-ish, you know what I mean? Like, as if we were doing theater. And Owen's a very different kind of actor. He's a writer actor, but he also, he's just talented. He's like a kid with a stick that sees the dragon in the backyard, but he has like a real reaction. But he doesn't have necessarily training or skill. Like, he just is incredibly talented. Vince is a theater actor, and Owen's just.
When we're looking on IMDb, you never know kind of what's accurate in the trivia, but they say that Vince Vaughn essentially was just kind of feeding lines to the grandma and the dinner table scene, and that was just reeling off whatever he said.
Yeah, he was. He was like across the table. He's like, say this on this one, and she was just looking at me. I'm like, yeah. Say what he's. He was feeding her really funny lines. He always does that, by the way. He's done that many times. When we've worked together, he's very generous with the other actors. He wants everyone to do well.
You mentioned Christopher Walken in that scene.
Yeah.
From what we gathered, he's got quite a dark sense of humor himself. Was that a bit of a feature on the set? I can imagine that particularly with that sort of scene, there was a lot going on. That
he's a wonderful and very strange man. He's such a nice guy. And sometimes trying to work through how to direct him. He has very different adjectives in his head that make sense to him. An example was, and I know he was basing some of the character on Ronald Reagan at the time. And he went walking down the aisle in that big wedding in the beginning. And he looked really like looking at the crowd, like at all these people, like there's 500 extras that day. And I went up to him, I'm like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, but all these people, it's your wedding. Like, so you see like kids that you haven't seen in a while that have grown up and stuff, like you're probably smiling and waving at people and having a good time. And he goes like, I have Alzheimer's. And I was like, and I knew at that point, don't correct him. Like, he may have exactly, that might be the note in his head that makes sense. So he does the next take and he's smiling and he's waving at people and stuff. And I'm like, and he's like, how was that? I'm like, it was great. He's like, okay, get him with Alzheimer's. So that, like, I don't know, I say you're familiar with these people. You have warm feelings, and he has Alzheimer's in his head. So, but it looks great when he walks down the aisle. He's plugged in. So he's very different than anybody else I've ever worked with, you know, and very committed. Again, like he comes from a very real place. He's a real actor, you know.
Thinking of sort of great characters. Obviously, he comes in quite late, but Chaz is obviously a great character. Was it hard not to overuse that character? Because a lot of people would just go, right, shove as much Will Ferrell in as possible.
That character didn't even show up in the original script. It was something that I could not figure out an all is lost moment for Owen between the second, third act break. And Owen very early on had pitched to me, he goes, maybe in the beginning we crash some funerals too. And I'm like, I don't think that'll work tonally, but he had pitched that idea. So I needed a bottom out moment. And I was like, you know, we talk about Chaz. What if you went to go see Chaz and he was crashing funerals? And it was just so grim that it sends you back to your friend. And so Owen kind of like wrote most of that scene. And it was really funny. And so we got, you know, we were trying to get Will. We didn't get Will till midnight the night before he was shooting. It was one day.
Oh, wow.
We were having a very hard time confirming him. And we had Nick Cage as a backup. I never told Will that.
That would have been different.
So, yeah. Oh my God. Like crazy. Weird. I don't know tonally. I mean, by the way, now Nick is a whole other thing, you know.
Yeah.
Totally off the reservation. So he, but Will was crazy that day. He was so good, and you know, crying at the funeral. He was just it was so uncomfortable. But he was great, and he kind of became. It was a lovely surprise. You know, on the DVD there is the audio from the very first screening of the movie ever for an audience when they knew nothing. There was no marketing, and when he starts coming down the steps. There's no way they can see him. I blacked him out. Like, you cannot see his face. They all start clapping and screaming like they know something's about to happen. They can't know who it is, but they do react. You can find this on the DVD. And we were always like, how did they intuit that? That was crazy. And then when he comes into the light, they all cheer. And he was the perfect person to play that character.
We read that they were mentioning him to play like Owen Wilson's role. Was that ever a thing? Because that would be like a completely different film, you would think.
No, I don't think so. Owen had already read the script and was circling it when I got attached, and then I kind of had to chase Vince down.
Yeah, say that would have been a completely different film. You've got Bradley Cooper in the film, and he obviously plays like almost like the perfect like asshole in the film. And then you look now, and he's like Hollywood's like sweetheart. So could you have envisaged that then, seeing how well he plays kind of the hateable person on screen?
You know, he's one of those actors that when he does, you know, American Sniper is the most internal performance, and you're completely gripped by it. But he just like, you know, by the way, he's the only actor I ever hired in the room of an audition, ever. He was so good, and I have a rule against doing that. And I was just like, all right, well, that's the guy. I can't even find anybody close to that. And I cast him in the room. I was like, okay, man, I'll see you at rehearsals. And he was like, really? And my casting director was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, that's the guy, man. I'm sorry. No one's going to beat that. That was crazy. And then McAdams, I almost hired in the room as well, because I could not find anyone to play that role. And she was the very last person that came in. I was supposed to go to a meeting at noon at New Line because they were going to force me to pick someone because I'd seen so many actresses. And she was literally the last person that came in at 11. And she was great. And I'm like, I discovered this girl, Rachel McAdams. And they're like, we have her in this movie coming out called The Notebook. Like, you could have, I'm like, tell me about her. Like, this is 200 people later. Yeah, you should have been the first person I looked at. So we got, you know, there was an amazing chemistry with the overall casting in the movie, you know, with Walken and Jane and Keira O'Donnell and Isla Fisher, who was, you know, insane. And like, she auditioned with Lisa Beach, my casting director, and she was like on her lap and feeling her up during the audition. I was like, whoa, okay, great. She's not going to have any issues. And she did that turn where she said, I love you. And started crying, and it was just crazy enough and believable enough that I didn't know if anyone was ever going to really nail that line, that moment. And she did it in the audition.
She definitely gets the crazy level right in the film, doesn't she?
Oh my God.
That's part of the magic of the film, I think, is we obviously talk about the chemistry between Vince and Owen, but considering all the wacky characters that are in there, they do all bounce off each other perfectly. I know you said about the dinner scene, for example.
It's a chemistry set. You know, you really, when you put together a cast, it's like, I think people feel it's much more random sometimes. And I always feel like there's, you know, when you do television, they make you give a first choice, a second choice, and a third choice for each role. And I'm like, there is no second and third choice. What are you talking about? Like, if there's the right person for the role, then you got to stick it. You know, you don't, it's not that malleable. I don't think it is. You know, when you look back and like, would The Matrix have been The Matrix with Will Smith or Brad Pitt? No fucking way. Like,
no.
Part of what's great is that it's Keanu, and he can say "whoa" and you laugh for a moment. You know, like. So I do think that stuff, when it works, it's very special when it works.
Yeah. I mean, when you say, obviously, as you say, it's not that malleable and you've got your choices in mind, were you ever nervous that as you're putting it together, did you have an idea in your mind as to how it would work? Or was it just...
I did. That's why I couldn't find Rachel. Like, Rachel is the heart of the movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody came in and played it like they were mad with their family. Okay, you know, that she's getting set up with this guy that she's not so sure about, and that, you know, she came in and she loved her family and thought maybe she was kind of much more dug into a certain warmth and a certain groundedness about the whole thing. And I looked at that and I'm like, that's who I'm going to be rooting for at the end of the movie. You know, that like these guys, she's the one that falls in love and then has to find out that this guy's been lying to her. And you know, she holds that movie together. It really is.
Because she would have been quite annoying if she'd been sort of the rich girl who kind of rebelled against the family. That would have been super annoying, a bit cliche.
Every other person came in and did that. And even when I tried to direct them out of it, I couldn't get what I was seeing in my head. She came in and nailed it on the first take in the audition, and I was like, all right, well, that's going to be the actor. And now I'm going to play with her. I'm going to make her give her a bunch of bad directions, see if she can do it. And she could do anything you asked her to do. She was amazing. She was a Stradivarius.
She was kind of the foil to some of the crazier stuff as well. Kind of a little bit straighter than the rest.
Someone's got to hold it down in every movie. You know?
We've read that the hardest thing to do with a comedy is finding the right ending, because so it's not just all this craziness and then just nothing. And this kind of ends perfectly. Was that hard to do, or was it really difficult?
You know, we had this idea that the guys don't want to, we didn't want this to be a movie where the guys apologize. You know, that was, even though it's a coming of age story for 35-year-old men, that's what the movie was. We were like, we suck if we apologize for the behavior in the front of the movie. So we were writing that monologue in the trailer the day of. Like, we were rewriting Owen's monologue when he goes, you know, I've been around a bit, but, you know, it got me here, you know, like, it's forgive him. And then the idea that they are going to take the girls crashing. I mean, you know, the movie is a chick flick disguised as a male movie. I mean, it really is. You know, it truly does follow much more of the wish fulfillment of the woman's side of the movie than it does with the men. And by the way, whenever you're dealing with sex, I think the women have to be the more empowered and the more grounded in all those scenes. Isla's more powerful. Jane Seymour's more powerful. You know, Claire is, you know, Rachel is the heart of the movie, and she's innocent. You know, they're all empowered from their positions, because otherwise it starts to feel unsafe and it doesn't feel okay to laugh at all that stuff.
You said about the ending there. Is this maybe the longest you've spoken about the film before and not had a sequel mentioned to you? Because you Google, I think even when you start typing in Wedding Crashes, sequel comes up almost just at the top right by Wedding Crashes.
It's really funny. So we sat down and tried to crack a movie, and by the way, we would have made a fortune. But we really felt proprietary towards the movie. We were like, look, this one worked out right. We nailed what we wanted to do. And it's so hard to hit that, you know, honestly, like, you know, it's very hard to get something tonally that right. And by the way, and it was R-rated, and they tried to pay me to make it PG-13. I mean, they did everything, you know, we stuck to our guns and it worked out.
Yeah.
And then when we sat down, like Owen and Vince and I would laugh all afternoon thinking of ideas, but they were the same movie. And so we decided not to do it. And then about 4 years ago, every year I get the call. You think about it. And then about 4 years ago, after I hung up, I'm like, no, we're not going to do it. Nobody's really interested at this point. And it would have to be a new story. And I hung up the phone. And immediately I'm like, wait a minute. They're now 45. And what happens when you're in your mid-40s and all of a sudden you're a single man again? And you can't really date the young girls again, or you look like a loser. And you're supposed to give up on love? Are you supposed to be relegated to this thing where, you know, you're in a different kind of relationship? Like, what's okay, what's not okay about that? And by the way, there are men that are in their mid to late 40s that maybe they want a family, but they never found a girl to settle down with, or maybe that, you know, that is a real issue. And that's a real story that's distinct of this generation. So I said, if we build it around that, because the first movie is built around men who haven't grown up, you know, and what happens with you and your best friend when one of them falls in love? Because what happens in any friendship when you're in high school or whatever, and all of a sudden the girl now you've got the girl around all the time. Like, the friendship has to change. So for me, it was the survival of a friendship over romance. Okay. That's what the first movie was. And this movie was like, how do you redefine family when you're in your late 40s as a man? And once we started kicking that around, I brought it to Vince and Owen, and they both really liked it. It started to kind of formulate, and, you know, we're still in the process, but there may be, if there's a chance, and I love that because it's a new movie. Like, we would not have to do the same movie. By the way, we would not do it if we didn't think we could make something as good as the first one. But I think that we're kind of we're circling something now that at least is worthy of a conversation. You know, before that, it would just be, I mean, I grew up with like Jaws 2. Jaws 2, I was psyched out of my mind. And I, like, 15 minutes in, you have the most depressing feeling. You're like, this is fucking horrible. They just took my money. And, you know, and I never wanted to do that to an audience. You know, we've had that happen so many. I mean, look, there's some movies that are better. You know, Austin Powers 2 was better, I thought, than the first movie. It was really funny. It does happen, but 9 times out of 10, it's the studio going for a money grab.
Sorry, go on, mate.
Sorry, mate. I was going to say, I think it's commendable. Not that from me it means too much, but I think it must be. There can't be too many people in that position who turn down the pressure from the studio and the chance to make that much money. Like, as you say,
I don't know why I did it. I mean, I don't know why I didn't do it. I would have been retired now. I mean, Jesus Christ. I'm so stupid. I remember Roger Birnbaum, who produced Shanghai Nights, saw me. He came to the premiere and he walked out and he goes, I've told you this before, never give up your franchise. This is one of those movies. You should be pushing to make a sequel. And I knew it was just that for him, it was about money too. And I was like, he's right, but I can't do it. You know, by the way, for me, movies are really, you know, for the 18 months to 2 years that you're on a movie, you don't do anything else. It's obsessive. You're completely inundated. There's not a day off. And when I finish a film, I really don't want to make the same thing again. Like, you know, my agents hate me. You know, I'm always like, I'm going to make The Judge. And they're like, oh, Christ. And you're like, this guy I can't walk a straight line. I'm just never interested in doing the same thing I just finished. So it's probably affected my career, but that's okay.
The film, I mean, we were, I think, 11 when Wedding Crashers came out, so we would have seen it later, but it's still, I imagine, just as funny to us watching it then as it was when it came out. And then you got it, the cinema release was obviously very successful, then the DVD release was very successful, and now it's on Netflix, for example. And so it never really dies because you're constantly getting new fans coming onto it.
It's really weird. You know, my son, when we were shooting Eurovision in London, my son went to sleepaway camp, one of those PGL camps. And he came back after a couple weeks, and he was like, there are two things, Dad. number one, I know what Pornhub is. I'm like, great. He's 12 years old. And number two, he goes, I'm the only kid in my entire bunk that had not seen Wedding Crashers, and it's embarrassing. You're my. I was like, oh shit. I was like, so I finally showed him over Thanksgiving here last year with his cousins and everything around, and he liked it.
That's already
yeah. But it was a very funny thing. I'm like, yeah, every generation has their moment with this movie. It's kind of crazy.
You said before about them previously trying to get it down to say like a PG or whatever. With making a sequel, would you worry about how the climate's a little bit different now that you'd have to adjust it slightly? Because obviously, you want to keep the magic of the film.
There's stuff in the movie that maybe wouldn't fly right now. You know what I mean? Like the grandmother is like.
She's probably got to go.
Yeah. But I also do believe that we're in a very unique moment. I don't believe in being politically correct with comedy or any kind of art. I think that's bullshit, and I think that I think right now justice is more important than comedy overall. I think that we're in a moment that is just too important. But I also kind of, I'm gonna walk into it one of these days because I just don't care. And I don't think you can. I think irreverence is part of what. I love Richard Pryor. I loved it because no one had ever heard anyone say the N-word on stage, and you were like, what is going on here? I love that. And I loved 48 Hours. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, but when he goes into the honky-tonk bar with the badge, you're like, I was in the theater for that. And the place went insane. No one had ever put their head around that kind of a thing. And I just think it's really important. I don't think that in America we would have had gay marriage ever pass without Ellen DeGeneres and Will and Grace. Like the art is part of what makes people open their minds. So it's like the idea of like over editing. I don't think art should be edited. Any form of art, by the way. Not painting, not, my father I grew up in Washington, D.C., and there's a gallery called the Corcoran Gallery of Art there. And they banned the Robert Mapplethorpe show, and he had been a member of that gallery for 20 years, and he pulled his membership, and he wrote a huge letter. He put it in the Washington Post, and he was just pissed off, and that was the 80s.
Yeah.
Not that long ago that, they're talking about whether you can put homoerotic art up and whether it is art or not. And it was like everyone else in the world understood what it was, and you were in DC with them with their heads up their asses. I had one time in the movie The Change Up when the head of the studio, who was Jewish, came up to me and said, I don't like that Jew joke, which, by the way, got a huge laugh. I was like, I'm Jewish. It's actually the only joke I'm allowed to say. So I'm going to keep it. And I just think that we should never do that. I believe in being an equal opportunity offender. Everybody should take a swing at everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there any line in particular that still gets quoted to you or over anything else?
Well, I can tell you that, I saw Chris Walken a few years later, and he was like, people scream meatballs at me when I walk down the street because I'm not even in that scene. He's like, I'm in the cowbell skit with him, and they scream meatballs at me. I was like, that is weird. Right? Why would they do that? They have him and Will. They remember the cowbell, and then they put the meatballs. But Lock It Up happens a lot. I mean, there's so many lines. Crab cakes in football. That's what Maryland does. Like people, you weird stuff like that. I don't even know. There's so many lines in that movie.
Just quickly. I mean, obviously, we're talking about acceptance and justice.
Yeah.
Comedy. Do you think? I mean, do you think comedy, depending on which way you go, as you said about being an equal opportunity offender, but depending on what way you go with it, do you not think comedy and the need to laugh and the way that comedy brings things into the zeitgeist can be used as a force to push things forward? Like it can go the other way.
Yes.
It can go the other way. And it can be offensive.
But even if it goes the other way, it raises the conversation. Like that's why I don't mind it. Like if you do something wrong, let's talk about it and see how that works. But I do think that I think it's necessary. I don't understand. By the way, the ability, you cannot make a joke about tragedy too close to it. You definitely need time.
That's what they say.
The Louis C.K. going out and making jokes about kids getting shot was fucking stupid as shit. Like you're waiting to come back and you're gonna start there. I mean, I love that guy. Like he is my favorite stand-up of this generation, and I was like, ooh, that's just not cool. It's not gonna work. You know what I mean? I don't know if that would ever work. But that guy has gotten away with murder. I mean, he has done. I mean, and I love it. You know, when he talks about. I don't even want to say it on air, but you know, that last stand-up that he did before he got in trouble, which I think is called 2017. Do you remember how he opens that and he goes, abortion? He's like, you know, it's either having a shit or killing a life, killing a baby. You know, you're like, and he goes through this and you're like, you know, he gets away with it. And then he reaches that funny moment where he goes, so basically it is killing a life, but I think mothers should be able to kill their babies. And you're like, you can't even explain why you're laughing with him, you know? So he does have a handle on some really outrageous comedy, and some people really can pull it off, but man, it's tough.
It is, and I do think with some things, obviously it can go the wrong way, but I do think you're right. I think it's necessary. I think it's easier to hold up a mirror when it's in a light-hearted way. No one really, if you're holding up a mirror harshly, it's got to be a brave person who really takes a look at it. But if you do it lightly and you move it ever so slowly and push the needle, it's easier to do.
It's tone and touch, you know what I mean? And it's a sensibility, and that's what you get with, you know, certain actors and certain writers, and hopefully as a director you figure those things out. But I do think that like. It is important for us to be able to laugh at stuff. You know, Springtime for Hitler, was that the name of the song?
From the producers. It is.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a Jewish kid that grew up with way too much never forget being pounded into my head, which is probably why I'm not religious now, because it's just miserable. But, you know, I still feel very, obviously, the Holocaust, being able to joke about the Holocaust, that's pretty fucking ballsy. And he pulled it off.
Yeah.
You were laughing with it. Oh, I remember going to see that play with my 93-year-old grandmother when it went on to Broadway. And I took her and watching her laugh. And I'm like, she lived through that. And she's laughing at it. That's important. Like that. Yeah. I think that's how you heal. When you can finally laugh at something, you know, because we take everything too seriously.
It's a little bit like you said with the old lady in Wedding Crashers. It's a shame there's got a sort of climate where that couldn't be said, because the whole point of that character is we're kind of laughing at her and having that view and that sort of thing. It's not, you're not one side.
You don't think it's okay.
No,
but you also understand she's from another generation and she's from white privilege and she's totally doesn't get the whole thing. And that actor that's playing the butler, his reactions are what make it work.
Yeah,
he's rolling his eyes and she's like, she's a moron. And so you can laugh with him at her. So if he looked hurt by what she said, you'd never be able to laugh.
The whole thing would fall flat, wouldn't it? You'd suddenly feel, you'd feel uncomfortable.
Look, I remember it was very funny on Shanghai Nights. Jackie Chan said to me, "Make sure you always shoot my whole thing, even though I'm not talking sometimes." And and I was like, "I always shoot everybody's close up. Don't worry." And he goes, "Because if you get in the editing room and there's not a laugh, just cut to my reaction, and you'll get a laugh." And I remember being in the editing room at one point. I couldn't get a certain scene to work, and I was like, let's see what Jackie's doing right after this line. He doesn't have a line, but man, he was right. I mean, I'm telling you, there was a dozen places in that movie where I just cut to his reaction and get a huge laugh. I was like, oh my God, this guy's a genius. You know, because his reaction is befuddled. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't, so like everything can fly from there because he's innocent.
Yeah, definitely.
And Owen's a scoundrel, so it's just makes it really fun. Yeah. When you
have to go to like a regular wedding now, is everything a bit underwhelming when you've done a film like this?
Yeah, that montage was the best version of what I think a wedding could be for me.
That's what it's like in everyone's mind. A wedding is like that, and then when it gets to a wedding, it's not quite.
I know, and you're like, oh my God, can we get through this?
Yeah.
It's funny because the marketing department was worried that we couldn't sell the movie because they thought these guys were predators, and I was like, what? they're like, yeah, they're going to a wedding. They lie about who they are so they can trick these girls into sleeping with them. And I'm like, whoa, I don't see it that way at all. I think they actually go to the weddings because they love the weddings. They like the free food. They like the dancing. They love the music. They hear all their favorite songs. And they like talking to the grandparents and the kids. And then they get the girl. That's like the byproduct. And I'm like, that's kind of what a seduction really is. You want to be seduced. You want to be convinced that it's okay to do what you're going to do, you know, and when it comes to getting in bed with someone. And that permission is what they provide through the way that they are. And by the way, they make the weddings look like it's the most fun wedding ever. They're not ruining.
They're a fixture of it, aren't they? You know, they're cutting the cake and doing speeches.
I know, it's insane. Well, it started becoming funnier and funnier to think about, like, well, could they actually give a speech?
Yeah,
you know, like how far would these guys go? And I think that's part of why that montage is so fun, because you're like, how deep have they ingrained? You know, they're up there cutting the cake and they're eating it. You know? By the way, that was funny. That was not in the script. Vince eating everything. So I had known Vince since my first movie. We're friends. And every time I go to eat with Vince, he eats my food. I mean, on my plate, you're going to finish that cheeseburger, you're going to have those fries, you know, and he would eat off my plate all the time. And that was like this wonderful thing. Like, as soon as we started shooting, I'm like, eat off of Owen's plate. Just keep eating off of Owen's plate whenever you're Owen get frustrated. He's like, why is he eating my food? I'm like, it's just funny. Just let him keep eating. And he eats so much. He's such a big guy. You know, so that was one of the special little touches that just kind of showed up on the set, you know, and it was just kind of, and we kept adding it everywhere we went.
That's one of the things that's special about the film, I find, is I've watched it so many times. When you watch it back another time, you'll find another little thing that just makes you laugh.
Tiny little weird stuff. Yeah. You know, it's so funny. I hadn't seen the movie since the premiere. So when I watched it with my 12-year-old, there's this great moment in the montage where the music drops out. And it's just kind of raw, natural dialogue of them laughing and doing this thing with the pair. And then it kicks back in and it goes again. It's like this empty bridge. Like, that whole thing was a new song in my mind, you know? And I was like, that Wedding Crashers montage was only like a page. And I had this idea. I'm like, I was so obsessed with wanting an action set piece, a comedy action set piece in the front of the movie. I was like, I want to blow people out of the water so hard that by the time Owen's confused with the girl in bed, you're confused. You're also being spun around. So you're right with him, and you feel like you just watched the funniest thing. Because, you know, like, when you go to like a great James Bond movie or a great action movie, if the opening destroys, you sit back like you've made your money's worth was paid for, and you trust the filmmakers. They get away with murder after that if they open right. And I really believe, like, I was like, why can't a comedy do that? Why can't we just be so fucking killer out of the gates that by the time you're 15 minutes into the movie, we've taught you what crashing is, because it seemed a little weird and esoteric to explain it. Like, it was very hard. But the montage was the solution, and it provided like this crazy thing that I was able to shape, and my music video background was able to kick in. Double time the song, re-recorded the song, double time all the key parts, and so that I could cut that quickly to it, because it's actually not that fast a song. But I remember, so the first week of shooting was all the montage, because I knew that if it went later and we went over schedule, it would get crushed.
Yeah.
And it was 4 days of shooting for that montage. And I remember Vince was like, how many bottles of champagne do you think we need? I'm like, dude, I got it in my head. We got to do it. You know, and he was just getting frustrated with popping in every wedding. And, you know, the repetition was insane. And on day 3, the studio was like, are you still shooting this scene? Yeah, we'll be done tomorrow, don't worry. And that was why we got away with it. You know, we literally almost took a whole week of shooting on a very tight schedule to give that moment, because that was my happiest moment, was when I realized that we had nailed that. I was like, it takes so much weight off the rest of the movie. You know, really does.
I think that bit is potentially where you seal that you said about so many different sort of audiences come into it. I think potentially that could be the bit where it's sealed, that because you could just have young men interested in this film, but anybody would want to be part of this wedding.
It was so fun and so outrageous and so figurative, and, you know, like, it was audacious too. You know, the bottles of champagne popping after they put the girls on the beds. That whole thing was like, I was pretty sure, you know, the head of New Line came at me and was like, I will give you a lot of money if you will take the breasts out of the movie. I'm not doing that. This is a movie that is about sex to love. It's about men growing up beyond sex and moving on to love. And it has to start in somewhere authentic. Like, it has to. And I never told them I shot them with their bras on. I never told them. I was like, we don't have it. We literally don't have it. I didn't print those dailies. I had them in my back pocket. It was totally, in case it tipped, I was worried that it would tip for me. It was funny. They offered me more money than they paid me on the movie to make it PG-13.
Wow.
It was really hard because I didn't have money then. So I was like, ugh, I should really just say yes. Like, who cares? But the movie had already tested a 94, and I didn't want to touch it, you know? I didn't want to touch it. So.
And a little bit like you said as well, the men in there are always in the weaker position. So that's kind of what adds to come in. There's never any threat.
There's nothing dark and skeevy about how it's presented. And that's just, you know, the combination of the guys and the material and me, and just, you know, I kind of always make things very human and grounded and silly. You know, the silliness is what was really important. It's a very silly movie. I mean, the characters are ridiculous. It's so funny. I forgot about that fight when he calls him an asshole on the street at the end. You know, I was like, holy shit, like, we really took this seriously. Like, we had like a full breakup, and you're with her, but what, you know, like, it was so crazy the way this movie got put together. And what we thought we were doing with the romance between these two guys, you know, that was what was so funny. It was like they go through a whole romantic comedy arc together. And I think that's part of what makes it so sweet, you know, is that they really do have, you know, Vince is in love with Owen, basically. You know, doesn't want to disappoint him, although he bullies him.
Obviously, as you said, it all worked out perfectly. And thank you again for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's been great speaking.
Really fun, you guys. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks.
Thank you. And we'll look forward to the potential sequel.
You got it. I'll let you know.
You got 3 viewers at least.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Take care.